Please join me in welcoming Father Grateful.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be with you. I don't know if my reputation precedes me, or I was at county jail once and this very menacing looking gang member came up to me. So you're Father Greg, the famous Father Greg. Your reputation exceeds you, he said. And I said, you're not the first one to say that. So first, let me just apologize if anybody or all of you have ever heard me before, because you may, in fact, hear some things again. So, because I only know one thing, and that's gang reality. So I'm not going to get too much into the weeds. All of you come from a place where you're ministering, helping folks in terms of domestic violence or child abuse. And so my comments are general aerial view. Occasionally we'll talk about how do we explain the gang thing, because that's all I know. So I'm reliant on you to kind of take what I say and then either process it through your own filter and say, oh, okay, that's how that connects there. You're going to make the connections, not me. And especially if any of you stay beyond 9:30 to 10:30, then apparently we have the room till 10:30. Then you can kind of make those connections out loud or ask me questions. But I also feel like it's important sometimes to present sort of an aerial view, some kind of higher sense of why are we in this, and what's the vision that kind of motivates us and draws us together. So there is a vision that everybody claims and clings to and keeps before them, especially if you're dedicated to such important tasks as healing and confronting things like domestic violence and child abuse. That there's a vision that motivates you. And so part of my task, I think, today is to help all of us reclaim, why are we here? What are we about? Why does this matter? And who are we called to serve? So the prophet Habakkuk writes, the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it. But we don't want to wait for this vision to become a reality where the world suddenly looks differently than it currently does. A world freed from domestic violence and child abuse, for example. A world freed from gang violence, which is what I know. We want to roll up our sleeves and we want to make something happen. So in the end, the highest, it seems to me, aerial view for all of us is that we're called to create a community of kinship such that God, in fact, might recognize it. It's about kinship. And I think that's important, in fact, essential. Because no matter what it is that we want to achieve, namely the end of domestic violence and the end of child abuse, for example, none of those things really can happen without a prevailing sense of kinship. No kinship, no peace. No kinship, no justice. It's the way it works. Mother Teresa, I think, diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? No us and them, just us. Even in issues where there are perpetrators. Again, this is how high the aerial view ought to be. There is no them, it's just us, with a whole lot of people carrying really heavy loads. How do we achieve a compassion that can stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it? So together, what we all want to do is imagine a circle of compassion, and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle. That's the goal. And to that end, we stand with the people who suffer, and with the poor, and the powerless, and the voiceless. And to that end, we stand with those whose dignity has been denied. And we stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear. And when you're really lucky, you get to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out. You get to stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. If our goal was kinship. I suspect we would no longer be promoting justice. We would be celebrating it. Now, for 25 years I've worked with gang members, so it's the only thing I know, so you're going to have to do the heavy lifting. You're going to have to say, okay, that's how that connects to my life. And because I don't know anything else, I'm an expert on exactly nothing. But the homies have taught me everything that's of value, and I'm really grateful to them. Lately, they've taught me how to text, and I'm so indebted to them. And I'm quite dexterous at it. What did we do before texting? You know, smoke signals, I guess, you know. Who can remember a time when we didn't have texting? I can't even recall it, but it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people. So, like, ooh, I don't want to talk to him. Here, let me do that, you know. So, LOL, OMG, BTW. I'm pretty good at it, you know. And there's a new one that the homies have taught me, OHN, which apparently stands for, oh, hell no. And I've been using that one quite a bit lately. So there I am in a car with Manuel and Poncho, two older vatos who work for me at Homeboy Industries, been to prison, tattooed. They do a variety of things for me. We're going to Palm Desert to give a talk at a high school. They're going to help me. So we leave at 9 and we start to make this, whatever it is, 2-hour trek. So 15 minutes into the traveling, Manuel's in the front seat, so I hear incoming, zzz, and he reads, he has a text, he reads it, he sort of chuckles to himself, and I go, what is it? And he goes, oh God, it's dumb, it's Snoopy back at the office. Well, we just left Snoopy at 9 o'clock. He gave me a big abrazo, and Snoopy and Manuel work together in the clock-in room where they clock in hundreds and hundreds of our workers at Homeboy Industries. And so I said, well, what's it say? Oh, God, it's stupid. Hang on a second. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now. Show them they got the wrong guy. Well, we died laughing, you know, and then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're from rival gangs. They used to shoot bullets at each other. And now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How can we move ourselves closer to bridging the gaps that divide us? Even in the work you do, you know, you're going to have an us and you're going to have a them, and that's always dishonest. It's not just morally bankrupt. It's always dishonest. There is no them. And boy, is there an inclination and temptation to do it. But we're trying to kind of achieve here a compassion that's really quite large, spacious, expansive, and vast. That's where we want to be as a people, as a civilization. We want to be in a place where we obliterate the illusion that there is a them. And so we're always trying to bridge whatever gap there is that separates us. Even in our service, you know, a service, there's distance there. Service provider, service recipient. You know, people will talk about boundaries, but what I'm talking about is kinship, you know, that the measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. That's a whole different thing. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesare as a friend and a remarkable man. And I remember once a reporter said to him, wow, these farm workers, they sure love you. And he shrugged and he smiled and he said, it's mutual. That's the idea. How do we get to a place of mutuality and kinship that really breaks down all this us and them stuff, which is quite, again, untruthful. I remember there was a homie who, nobody got more jobs through Homeboy Industries than this guy, Cesare. Everybody called him Dreamer. He grew up in Pico Gardens housing projects, so I knew him as a little kid. And But, he'd always sort of got into a gang and mainly would sell drugs and use drugs. And, when he would become his own best customer, he would end up getting popped and he'd go away. And
you don't get a chair anymore.
no, oh my God, we're in total violation of fire code. There you go. Sure, I don't care where people can sit up here on the podium as far as I. So then we're, where was I? So Cesare. So he got more jobs either out in the private sector we found him or in Homeboy Industries. And then he'd gravitate back slowly to vague criminality. And so this one time he finished an 8-month stretch in prison for a violation. And so he comes and sees me, and he says what gang members often say, "This time it'll be different." All right, so I call a friend of mine, a guy who runs a vending machine company in Alhambra, California, and he hires Cesare right away. And Cesare was about 25 years old at the time, a very funny kid with a dangerous sense of humor. And hi, kiddo. And so he shows up in my office 2 weeks after he'd gotten hired, and there he is waving proudly his very first paycheck. And he goes, "Damn, gee, this paycheck makes me feel proper." I mean, my jefita, my mom, she's proud of me, and my morritos, they're not ashamed of me, and you know who I have to thank for this job. And I said, "Oh, God." Who? And he looked at me strangely and he said, "Well, God, of course." I said, "Well, sure." No, that's right. Yeah, God. He said, "You thought I was going to say you, didn't you?" I said, "No, God's absolutely number one." Yeah. He said, "You are so lucky we're not living in them Genesis days." I'm sorry, them Genesis days? He goes, "Yeah, because God would have had struck down your ass already by now." And we just fell on the floor, and I defy you to identify who's the service provider and who's the service recipient. I don't know. There's something mutual happening there. I never felt this more keenly than in my own life. In the last few years, I've struggled with health and leukemia and went through chemotherapy, and I'm feeling okay at the moment. Or as the homies always say, "I hear your cancer's in intermission." I said, "Yeah." Apparently it stepped out to the lobby to buy popcorn. May the line be long, So, but this news hit the front page of the Sunday LA Times, and so word spread even in the gang world. And so homies and homegirls sort of came out of the woodwork. A homegirl named China left me a message at home saying, "Now it's our turn to take care of you." Very sweet. A big, huge homie, Grumpy, who drove me here today, he's circling the place. He, huge guy, 6'5", tattoos, standing in front of my desk. Apparently God had forgotten to give him a neck, and he was, and he had big lagrimas in his eyes, and he says, "What do I have that you need?" Meaning organs. Boy, was I happy to tell him I didn't need any of his organs, But it was the thought that counted. It's just, there is no more room. Anyway, so one of my favorites was a 15-year-old little knucklehead gang member who kind of came late in the game. I was already in the midst of chemotherapy, and the homies always wanted to drive me to the hospital, St. Vincent's Hospital, and so they'd drive me there and they'd vie to pick me up, and clearly the drive to the hospital and from the hospital was way more hazardous than chemotherapy itself, But there are other values here. So I came home from therapy, and I'd always go to the office because I'd rather be there than any place else. And so I'm just kicking it there at the office. And And this little knucklehead gang member comes in, 15 years old, and he comes in, he plunks himself down. I'm behind my desk, and he looks positively stricken. He says, "I hear you have leukemia." I said, "Yeah, I do." And there was this awkward silence, and then he says, "My cat had leukemia." "Yeah, she died." I said, "Oh, gosh. Really sorry to hear that. I am awfully glad you stopped by, because you just picked me up right there." My all-time favorite was a homie who called me from jail, Collect, a guy named Loco. And Loco had just read this on the Sunday LA Times, and he said, "Hey, what's up with this leukemia anyway?" I said, "Well, it's cancer. It's in the blood. The doctor says my white count's too high." He goes, "Them doctors, they don't be knowing nothing." I say, "What do you mean?" "Well, hello, of course your white count's high." So, we get a lot of second opinions. But I've decided to call it kinship. Why not? We're in this together. There's an idea that's taken root in the world. It's at the root of all that's wrong with it. And the idea would be this, that there just might be lives out there that matter less than other lives. And how do we stand against that idea? Homeboy Industries, I should tell you, was born 23 years ago when I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles, Dolores Mission Parish, right in the middle of two public housing projects, Pico Gardens and Aliso Village. And together they comprise the largest grouping of public housing west of Mississippi. We had 8 gangs in those 2 housing projects, which is unheard of. Normally you'd have 1 gang per. We had 8. And so half of those gangs were at war with the other half, leading the LAPD to designate my parish as the place of the highest concentration of gang activity in the whole city, at least in those years. And so we started to do stuff as a parish. I remember, first off, we started a junior high because there were so many middle school age gang members who had been given the boot from their home school and nobody wanted them. And they were wreaking havoc in the project. So I remember going to them and saying, "Hey, if I found a school that would take you, would you go?" And they all said yes, which sort of to my surprise. And then I couldn't find one that would take them, so now what do I do? So we started one. And so that brought gang members to the church. So they, to the 3rd floor of what used to be the convent above our elementary school. So that sort of jostled the idea of what a church should be. Hermetically sealed, good people in, bad people out. And that was quite challenging for my folks. And then once the gang members got there and they were comfortable, they said, if only we had jobs. That's really sort of how it happened. So we went in search, myself and the women in the parish, we marched all around the factories that surrounded the projects in search of felony-friendly employers, And that was as forthcoming as you can imagine it. So we couldn't find people willing to hire these folks. So we started our own stuff. We built a child care center, which took us 2 years with enemy rival gang members side by side building it. It would have taken 6 months if professionals did it, And then we had little crews, cleanup crews, graffiti crews. And then the demand was just so great that we couldn't wait. So by 1992, we started our first business, Homeboy Bakery, right across the street from the church, an old abandoned bakery. Then 1 month later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market in downtown LA. Once we had plural, we came up with the highfalutin Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved in this, And then we're off and running. And now, 23 years later, we're the largest gang intervention rehab re-entry program in the United States of America. We didn't intend to do that. We sort of backed our way into it. And anything worth doing is worth failing at. This is one of my mottos in life. Like not all our businesses worked. Homeboy Plumbing was not a huge success. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. Sleep at the wheel. And and now, I always say we engage 1,000 gang members a day at Homeboy Industries. So we have hundreds and hundreds who work there. But then you have many hundreds who are awaiting their drug test to come in. And then you have many hundreds who are awaiting their pre-orientation meeting and their selection committee. And, we have at any given time 4,000 clients who are awaiting their next tattoo removal treatment, who have already begun the process. We have 3,000 who are waiting to start their very first treatment. And tattoo removal, we no place on the planet Earth removes more tattoos. So we have a dedicated clinic, 3 laser machines, 12 doctors, and 4,000 treatments a year. And it all began because of a guy named Frank who wandered out of Corcoran State Prison. And 2 days after he left the prison, he shows up in my office and sitting in front of me. And there, and excuse my French, tattooed on his forehead is "fuck the world," from here to here to here, like a billboard screaming at you, and he says, I am having a hard time finding a job. I said, well, Frank, maybe we could put our heads together on this one, So I hired him right away because I'm starting to imagine, do you want fries with that? No, we don't want fries. So where am I going to send him? So I hire him and he works at our bakery, and all he does is in this one little lonely corner, he was just bagging the bread, with this a billboard across his forehead, and so I went in search for doctors who would be willing to help, and I found one at White Memorial Hospital. I can't recall exactly what he did initially. I think it was something like 1 hour every 3 months. It was incredible. Soon I had a waiting list of 3,000, and now we just have grown, into owning our own machines and keep inviting more and more doctors to volunteer and help. And we owe it all to Frank, who some months ago, I hadn't seen him in a while, showed up in my office. He's a security guard at a movie studio, and there's not a trace of this thing left on his forehead, And all of us are a whole lot more than the dumbest, stupidest, angriest thing we've ever done, Underscoring all the more that we're in this together. Whenever we're inclined to identify a them, we know we're on the wrong path when we do it. No matter what, no matter who, no matter how egregious, we're on the wrong path when we do it. So Homeboy offers a whole menu of curricular things from, huge domestic violence clinic, and both one for men, one for women, NAAA, anger management, parenting. We still have a school. We have a thing called Baby and Me, which is every Friday. It'll be tomorrow at 9:30 if you ever want to get a tour at Homeboy. Come on Friday where you can watch this, because Baby and Me takes place up in our large classroom. And the homies and the homegirls, hundreds of them, they bring their toddlers if they have toddler-age kids. And they're taught how to play with their kids. And so it's just an amazing, joyous thing if you walk in there, singing, dancing. The minute you walk in, hello to you, and they're all in their places with their bright, shiny faces. And they have big, multicolored parachute, where you put a kid in the middle and you throw it up. And the kids are, the clay and paint and music and singing and dancing. It's unbelievable. And we had a guy who worked for us, big, huge guy, 2 weeks out of prison, named Big Mike. And he wanders into this class. And he sees all this joyous, happy singing, dancing. He goes to the teacher, "Can I sign up for this class?" She says, "Sure." She starts to take his name. "Do you have to have a kid to be in it?" Which, how can I put this? It's sort of the idea, yeah. But I have no doubt that he was a child, but I have serious doubts if he ever actually had a childhood. So you watch the parents in this room, and they're something vicarious is happening. They're regaining something that clearly had been denied them as kids. They're not just learning how to do this for their kids. It's part of their own attachment repair, if you will. And so we have case managers, we have mental health, huge mental health team at Homeboy Industries. And that sort of came about oddly. There was sort of a tipping point. I would say maybe it was, 5 years, maybe a little bit more, when all of a sudden things shifted. So I remember my first 10 years working with gang members. Gosh, I think it might help you if you talk to a therapist. I'm not crazy. Or how about in a group? No, hell no, I'm not going to talk about my life. And that's solid 10 years. Then all of a sudden there was a tipping point. Have you read the book Tipping Point? Where all of a sudden there's this whole shift, and the toothpaste is out of the tube, and we'll never go back to stigmatizing. We'll never go back to saying I'm not crazy. And what was the tipping point? Well, I get a phone call. I had so many of these experiences. A homie calls me named Gumby. He calls me from an emergency room, and he says, come pick me up. And so I get there and I said, what happened? He said, the doctor said I had an anxiety attack. I said, oh really? And we were talking, and I said, you know what might help? That you might talk to somebody. Of course, I'm always prepared for what the answer is going to be. And he goes, you mean like analyze this? Yeah, like analyze this. Okay. Suddenly it shifted. And I mean to tell you, I've had that experience 10, 15, 20 times where they say, you mean like analyze this. And suddenly it is analyze this. Robert De Niro is a mafia don. Billy Crystal's the therapist. He has an anxiety attack. He talks to the therapist. Go figure. Now will we ever return to stigmatizing? I mean, I'm talking about this population. Everybody's in therapy at Homeboy Industries, and I don't know anybody who says, hell no, I'm not crazy. Nobody says this anymore, which is an amazing, wonderful thing, So, and we owe it all to Billy Crystal, So, and then we have all our businesses. We have a solar panel installation training program. We have Homeboy Bakery still, Homeboy Homegirl merchandise where we sell our logo stuff. Homeboy Silkscreen, Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude will gladly take your order. My favorite story in the last few months was Oscar-winning actress Diane Keaton showed up for lunch one day. She who won an Oscar for Annie Hall. She was in all the Godfather movies. And she shows up. She's there with a guy who's there once a week. And lunch is packed, usually with people waiting line out the door, and they get a table. And her waitress this day is Glinda. And Glinda's a homegirl, been there, done that, gang member, tattooed, been to prison, parolee. She doesn't know who Diane Keaton is. So she's taking her order, and Diane Keaton says, well, what do you recommend? And Glinda rattles off the 3 platillos that she most likes, and Diane Keaton says, oh, I like that second one, that sounded good. And then something dawns on Glinda, she goes, wait a minute. I feel like I know you from somewhere. I feel like we've met. And Diane Keaton decides to deflect it humbly. Oh gosh, I don't know, I suppose I have one of those faces that people think they've seen before. And Glinda goes, no, now I know. We were locked up together. That just took my breath away. And I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings, now that I think of it. But suddenly kinship so quickly. Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress. It's mutual. All of us are called to be what the late, great child psychologist Alice Miller calls enlightened witnesses, everybody in this room. People who, through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love, return people to themselves. Now, you don't ever hold the bar up and ask people to measure up. You just show up. and you hold the mirror up and you tell people the truth. Knowing that your truth is my truth, and my truth is a gang member's truth. And a gang member's truth is a victim of domestic violence's truth. And their truth is everybody else's truth. It's all the same truth. Here's the truth. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And then you watch people on the margins become that truth. They inhabit that truth. And no bullet can pierce it. And no 4 prison walls can keep it out. And death can't touch it because it's so huge. But all of you in this room also know that occasionally you have to reach in and dismantle messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that weigh people down. The great scripture scholar Marcus Borg says that the principal suffering of the poor throughout scripture and throughout history is shame and disgrace. And I think he's quite right. I am in 25 different detention facilities where I do Catholic services on a rotating basis, all the probation camps, juvenile halls, youth authority facilities. And usually on a Saturday morning, I do a couple masses out in the boonies in Las Afueras, very far. And then I have to race back to Dolores Mission because I've been there for 25 years. I know everybody. I get asked to do stuff from gang members and everybody else. So my Saturdays always look identical. I get back 1 o'clock, whatever, baptisms. 2 o'clock, quinceañera. 3 o'clock, wedding. 4 o'clock, exorcism. Just checking to see if you're still listening to me. I've never done one of those, but anyway. So I race home this one day, and it's 20 minutes to 1, and I think, oh, gosh, I got time to go to my office, which in those days was on First Street, and just go through my mail all by myself. So I race over there, and there I am, contento, feliz, just by myself, reading the mail. When all of a sudden this woman barges into the office. I find out her name is Lisa. She's 34 years old. This is the first time she's ever stepped foot in my office. Everybody knows her. You see her around on First Street. She's kind of famosa. She's a prostitute, heroin addict, gang member, felon, parolee. She's kind of a famous peleonera and gritona. She's always fighting. She's always screaming. You can hear her scream as they toss her out of the bar next door daily. You can hear her scream into a payphone on First Street, "Just let me stay tonight," pleading with family and friends. And this is the first time she's ever stepped foot in my office. And now it's 7 minutes to 1. She comes barreling through, plunks herself down in a chair over here. I'm behind my desk. She launches right in. "I need help." Ooh, I've been to like 50 rehabs. I'm known all over, nationwide. Went to Catholic schools all my life, she says. Graduated from elementary. I graduated from Sacred Heart High School in Lincoln Heights. And then she gets quiet and still. In fact, first time I ever used heroin was right after I graduated. And I've been trying to stop since the moment I began. And I watched as she leaned her head against the wall behind her, and her eyes became like 2 ponds, water rising to meet its edges and spilling over. And she cried and she cried until she leveled her eyes at me and she said with great deliberation, "I am a disgrace." And suddenly her shame meets mine. Because when I had seen her step into my office that afternoon, I had mistaken her for an interruption. It's mutual. It's mutual. I grew up in LA, 2 wonderful parents, 5 sisters, 2 brothers. It was a wonderful place to grow up. We lived in a big old house. And my mom used to say, "Don't go to the attic." Which, of course, you know, this is all kids need to hear, you know. Shortly thereafter, I believe we were selling tickets to the attic, you know. come one, come all, the attic. So one day when she wasn't looking, we went up to the attic, and so we were rummaging through the place, which was something of a precarious, planky place, hence the prohibition, I guess. And we found this box that had a bunch of old stuff in it, and there was this big old clunky clay record, huge record, with a one song recorded on it, and the label was handwritten, and it said, "Oh Holy Night," the Christmas Carol. Underneath it, it said Kathleen Conway, which is my mom's maiden name. And we rushed downstairs and we put it on our little kitty's phonograph, and we encircled the speakers lying on our stomachs and chins resting on our fists. And we couldn't believe our ears as the needle hit the record, and through the scratchiness we discovered that our mom, before she decided to have 8 kids, was an opera singer. We could not believe that this glorious voice belonged to the same woman who hollered at us, and so we played the grooves off this thing, at least I did, and I remember a mantra was born, though I didn't fully understand it in the early years. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till he appeared and the soul felt its worth. Yeah, it's about Christmas, and yeah, it's about Jesus. But how is it not the job description of everybody in this room? It's about you appearing, and because you've chosen to appear, the soul feels its worth. Exactly right. Exactly what happens to be on God's mind. And if you'll permit me a quick little biblical thing, Jesus articulates it quite clearly, that you may be one. He could have said a lot of things. He could have been self-referential, and he wasn't. It's about us. It's about you. It's about you being one. It's about us being in this together. Nobody in this room has ever met a hopeful kid who joined a gang. It's never happened in the history of kids. It's never happened in the history of gangs. Never. Not once, no exceptions. Hopeful kids don't join gangs. If that's your diagnostic beginning, then you're going to walk down a wholly different path. The outsider view sometimes drives the inside of this issue, and that's unfortunate. So there I am on Dr. Phil not long ago, and we were trying to talk the producers down for weeks and weeks in advance. Don't do a scared straight stupid thing, and trying to kind of debunk a lot of the myths. And it looked like they were nibbling, And I said, here's your ad today on Dr. Phil, gangs as you've never seen them. All the myths destroyed, whatever it is, Well, they didn't do this. So there I am waiting in the green room, and all of a sudden I hear, "Ladies and gentlemen, Father Greg Boyle." And I walk out there, and it's the live audience, And there are 2 stools, Dr. Phil, and there's mine awaiting me. And on one side of us is a coffin. And on the other side of us is a perfectly reconstructed jail cell with toilet, bed, and sink. You get the point? Grab the kid by the lapels, if a kid is wearing lapels, slap them around. Don't you see that if you join a gang, you'll end up dead or in prison? Don't you see? And so they had kids that they'd flown out there who, with mothers who didn't know what to do with them. And, I had to be the one to tell Dr. Phil, this kid knows this better than you'll ever know it. He knows the absolute total consequences, the likely consequences of joining a gang. What's the difference? He doesn't care. It's about a lethal absence of hope. It's not about supplying information. That's the outsider view. Oh, I see, he could have had a V8, he didn't know it, He's lacking sufficient information to make this choice. And that's what outsiders think. Yesterday I was at a thing in Downey called Good, Gangs Out of Downey, and I was the speaker at this luncheon. And the person who prayed, again, a very well-intentioned person, she was praying for all those lured into gangs and for all those who lure them. Well, no kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang. He's always fleeing something. Always. no exceptions. Gangs are not attractive. They do not lure you. They do not draw you. They do not pull you. There is no pull factor. There's only push factor. And you go, well, I've watched Oprah and I've seen gang members on the show, and they say, that's what I wanted. Join a gang and see the world. My second family. They have my back. Wine, women, and song. Money, fast cars. They say that because they can't tell you the truth. And they may not even have access yet to the truth. And what is the truth? My mom used to put cigarettes out on me. And she used to hold my head in the toilet and flush till I nearly drowned. That's why I joined a gang. You're not going to say that on Oprah. You're going to say this other nonsense. And that's how we've come to believe it. And people will say, I know, Father, that's what they say. They say that's why they joined a gang. And you believe them. And that's what we call at Homeboy coming to terms, where you come to terms with the truth of what this has meant. In the same way in AA, you talk about romancing the drink. Remember that time we were driving? How did we get home that night? You were wearing the lampshade, ha, ha, ha. What you're not saying is, my wife left me, my kids hate me, and I lost my job. Ha, ha, ha. That's the truth you're not saying. That's what coming to terms is about. That's how you want to avoid romancing the drink. No kid is seeking anything when he joins a gang. He's always fleeing something. Gangs are the places kids go when they've encountered their life as a misery, and who doesn't know by now that misery loves company? Well, these are important diagnostic moments. Nobody has ever met a bad diagnosis that led to a good treatment plan. That's never happened. Before, I used to go to a doctor who I no longer go to. He thought I had mono, so he treated me for 1 solid year for mono. I had leukemia. I think we can all agree there's a difference, And a bad diagnosis is never neutral. It puts you behind the 8 ball. It wastes time and is costly and does damage. I had to be rushed into chemo because the diagnosis was wrong. That's why it's important to get this one right. If we think the problem here is these kids just aren't scared enough, we couldn't be more wrong. These kids just aren't hopeful enough, and that's the difference. What is the profile of a gang member? One of 3 things, or a combo burger of one or more of them. 1, severely, deeply despondent. 2, absolutely traumatized and damaged. Or 3, mentally ill. If you know that that's the profile, then you're going to heal the damage early. You're going to rescue the traumatized, or you're going to deliver mental health services in a timely way. If we did that, we wouldn't have to have the consequences that we now have in prisons and all that. Anyway, a kid who was most resistant to all my offers of help was a kid named Bandit, who grew up in Aliso Village housing projects. And I remember he was, I'd ride my bike in the middle of the night and I'd see him there running up to cars selling crack cocaine, and then he'd come back and he'd be counting his money, and then he'd see me and I'd say, hey, how about a real job? That's okay, G, I'm okay. Very polite. Until 15 years ago, this guy showed up in my office. 15 years ago. And I couldn't believe my eyes. And there he is. I go, y ese milagro that you're here. And he says what gang members often say, I'm tired of being tired. So I walk him to a job developer, and as luck would have it, they are able to find a low-level, low-pay, first kind of job, warehouse, unskilled. And so he begins. Now cut to today, 15 years later. A Bandit is el mero chingon of the whole damn warehouse. He's the shot caller. He's runs the whole shooting match. He owns his own home. He's married. He has 3 kids. And I hadn't heard from him in like 2 years, and no news is usually good news with gang members. So He calls me one afternoon on a Friday, medio breathless and paniqueado. And he says, gee, you gotta bless my daughter. ¿Qué pasó, mijo? Is she sick? Is she in the hospital? No. On Sunday, she's going to Humboldt College. You imagine my oldest, my Jessica, she's going to college. But she's a little chaparrita and we're afraid for her because that's Humboldt's way up north, that's far. So do you think you could give her a blessing before she goes? I said, are you kidding me? I'd be honored. Look, tomorrow's Saturday. I have an exorcism at 1. Just checking again. Why don't you guys come at 12:30 and we'll do a little send-off? And they said, great. So sure enough, at 1 o'clock, there they are, and Bandit and his wife and the 3 kids, including Jessica. So I said, well, let's stand in front of the altar. Let's put Jessica in the middle. Everybody, let's surround her with our bodies and with our love. Everybody touch her, connect to her. Put your hands on her arm, on her shoulders, on her head. Everybody touch her. Bow your heads. Close your eyes. And as the homies say, I do a long-ass prayer. I go on and on. And somewhere in the middle of this prayer, I notice that we've all become sort of chillones, you know, where everybody's crying, you know, including me, and I don't know why we're crying, except for the fact that Bandit and his wife don't know anybody who's ever gone to college except me. Certainly nobody in their family, so, you know, we finished the prayer, and I'm wiping my tears, and we're all laughing about, my God, we sure got mushy there, didn't we? And then to change the subject, I look at Jessica. So, what are you going to study at Humboldt College? She was very quick. Forensic psychology. I go, damn, forensic psychology. And Bandit chimes in, yeah, she wants to study the criminal mind. And Jessica, very deadpan, looks at her father and does one of these, you know. And he sees her, he gets the joke. He says, yeah, I'm going to be her first subject. So we walk outside and we big abrazos and they pile in the car. And but Bandit hangs back, and I'm glad he has. I said, hey, can I tell you something? I give you credit for choosing to walk in your own footsteps, to be your own man. I'm proud of you. And his eyes fill up with tears, and he says, ¿Sabes qué? I'm proud of myself. All my life, people called me a lowlife, a bueno para nada, a good for nothing. I guess I showed them. I said, yeah, I guess you did. And the soul feels its worth. All of us are called to go to the very farthest edges of that circle of compassion, with the sure and certain hope that if you stand there, the circle will widen. And people who are outside will be let in. And when you do this, brace yourself. People accuse you of wasting your time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. And so we choose to make those voices heard. About 5 years ago, in a regime, some of you may recall, when Laura Bush was the First Lady of the United States. Yes, I do remember that. Yeah. So she was visiting across the country different after-school programs, mentoring programs. We were the only gang intervention program she visited in the whole country. And so we were quite honored, you know, and the Secret Service said that this visit couldn't take place at our headquarters because it was too porous, too hard to secure. And so, so we decided to have the visit take place at the Homeboy Silkscreen, which is kind of a factory that's off campus, if you will, a standalone factory among other factories. And so on the day of her visit, you know, it was incredible. Bomb-sniffing dogs, sharpshooters on the roofs of all the surrounding factories, sharpshooters in the rafters in the building, aimed at the homies, no matter where they were walking, was aimed at them. It was quite, hi, how are you doing? Very intimidating. And we were told 2 weeks before by the head of the Secret Service detail, a kind of a Clint Eastwood lookalike, a severe-looking fellow, he said, Father, only 50 people can be a part of this thing. I said, really? We got like 400 workers. Sorry, only 50. I said, okay, so I need the list, the names, their birth dates, and their social security numbers. So we decided to declare undocumented worker day off day on that day, We'll see you on the following day. We'll videotape it for you. So I type up this list and I hand it to Clint, and it comes to me 2 days later looking more severe than I recall. And he says, wow, yeah, Father, gosh. These people have records, he says to me. Like this news might come as a surprise to me. And I say, well, at Homeboy Industries, that's sort of the idea, So anyway, we had to negotiate two homies who apparently their resumes were way too long for the White House. But they ended up letting them in too. So anyway, the visit went off without a hitch, and everybody felt good about themselves that the wife of the President of the United States visited us. Well, about 3 months later, I get a phone call from the White House from a staffer of the First Lady's, and the woman says, Father Boyle, Mrs. Bush is planning a national conference. People are coming from all over the country to Howard University in Washington, D.C., and she's calling the conference Helping America's Youth. And she would like you to be one of the 3 keynote speakers. I said, well, I'd be honored. Oh, by the way, I almost forgot. Mrs. Bush would like you to bring 3 homies with you. Now, whether the First Lady of the United States used the H word, I can't be certain. And she said, afterwards, a select group of participants, not everybody, but a select group of participants will be brought into the White House for dinner. Now, certainly crooks have resided in this house before. But it may well be the first time gang members have ever stepped foot in there. So I went searching among my 400 employees for 3 of the most menacing looking gang members I could find, just to mess with the White House a little bit, how many opportunities do you get to do that, So I picked Gabriel, Gus, and Herbie, guys who've been to prison, tattooed, large and in charge. You wouldn't want to meet them in a dark alley or even a well-lit one. And so I call them in. They'd never been on a plane, never been to D.C., of course. And I said, look, we're going to the White House for dinner. You cannot exactly wear size 85 waist dickies, So we're going to have to buy you suits, Of course, where are you going to go? Men's Warehouse. You're going to like the way you look, I guarantee it. Yeah. Well, that guy wasn't there, but we walk into the Men's Warehouse in Burbank, and I swear to you, every single solitary salesperson rushes us at the door as if to say, now how may we help the 3 of you leave our store as quickly as possible? I said, we're going to be needing some suits. They're having dinner at the White House, and a big eye roll, yeah, right, sure. So they dispatched them into dressing rooms, and I'm out there picking through ties, and the first of our group comes out, Gabriel. And Gabriel's in a perfectly fitted light gray suit. He's standing in front of a 6-sided mirror, just staring at himself. Now, Gabriel at the time was about 25 years old, been into prison, wife and 3 kids, and a knucklehead in his day. His neck is blackened with the name of his gang that stretches across the entirety of it from ear to ear, jawbone to collarbone, other tattoos on his face. He's gotten a lot of treatments. He's now moved on to a better job elsewhere, but in those days, he was our premier tour guide. And we have about 10 tour groups a day at Homeboy Industries at our huge headquarters. So he would wait for you at the front door and greet you with this $1 million smile. He'd walk you through the place and introduce you to the job developers. He'd hand you goggles so you could watch tattoos being removed on the premises. He'd hand you a hairnet so you could observe enemy gang members baking bread together. He'd take you into the cafe and tell you what his favorite platillos were. He gave great tours. But beyond his ability to give a tour, really it was the quality, character, nature of his heart. Golden, pure, innocent. though the packaging might suggest otherwise. In fact, the day won't ever come when I am more noble or have more courage or am closer to God than Gabriel. So I walk up to him, and still he's staring at himself in the mirror, mouth wide open, and I tap him on his shoulder. Hey, are you okay? And he doesn't take his eyes off the guy in the suit, and he says, damn, gee, I'm already pinching myself. Like he can't believe he's in a suit. Can't believe he's headed to the White House. Well, I bought the tickets months in advance, but 2 weeks before we're scheduled to go, I have no idea what compelled me. I call him in, only Gabriel, and I sit him down and I said, hey, did you ask your parole officer for permission to go to Washington, D.C.? He goes, of course I did. I said, well, I'm just checking. Yeah, she said no. I go, Gabriel, when were you going to get around to telling me this? Well, I wasn't going to tell you. I was afraid you wouldn't let me go. Like a little kid. You know, I go, Miko, we got to do this the right way. What's her number? So he's sitting down there, and I call this woman. I give the spiel. Howard University, conference, national, White House, First Lady, suits, dinner. And she says, nope, high control. Which means high control parole, which means a heightened kind of sense of vigilance. And I said, could I talk to your supervisor? And so she transfers me. And I give the spiel one more time, and the guy says, no way, high control parolee. I said, gosh, is there somebody like a notch above you? And I go to the notch guy, and I give the spiel one more time, and the guy says, let me be really clear with you. This guy is not leaving the state of California. He's a high control parolee. And they all seem to be having a really bad case of, and Gabriel, who exactly did you think you were that you get to go to the White House for dinner? Well, faxes and phone calls and emails from the Department of Justice, from the White House, from the First Lady's office. And the day before we're scheduled to fly, Gabriel gets permission from the parole office. We were going to go anyway, but I find anyway, so we leave on a Tuesday, and it's mishap after mishap. The homies are late, of course, so that puts us into bumper-to-bumper traffic in LAX. And I turned to nobody in particular. Hey, did all you guys remember to bring your IDs? Calladito, silence. A lone voice from the back seat. Shit. It's Gus. We have to go back and get his ID. So we leave on a Tuesday. We stay with my brother and his wife in D.C. And Tuesday we do some of the touristy things. Wednesday, all day long, touristy things. Thursday, our last day in D.C., which is the day of the all-day conference. Howard University, suits, all day long. And then the dinner. And so we discover in the early morning darkness of Thursday that apparently poor old Gabriel, as he was running to my car in the early morning darkness of Tuesday with his bag over one shoulder and his Men's Warehouse suit over the other, covered in plastic, open at the bottom. And as he ran to my car, the movement apparently jostled the pants, and they just slithered off the hanger. And they fell, unbeknownst to him, somewhere on the sidewalk or in the gutter. And a homeless man is liking the way he looks, I guarantee it. Don't get too upset. So in the early morning darkness of Thursday, I could hear the plaintive cry of poor old Gabriel throughout my brother's house. I don't got no pants. So thank God for my cuñada. She jerry-rigged a pair of my brother's pants, and he looked fine. Nobody noticed. Same color. We go to the conference. And after the conference, the sun is setting, and the four of us walk into the White House. Suits, ties, tattoos. There are butlers walking the halls with trays of long-stem glasses of white wine, and the homies are snatching those puppies as quickly as they can. And we go to the blue room, the red room, the green room, all the different colored rooms, and they all have a little string quartet and elegant. It had every imaginable food, you know, I mean, and somewhere like maybe my 7th trip, Gabriel standing next to me, and he eyeballs these white potatoes cut lengthwise with a hole carefully bore out in the middle, stuffed with caviar and a sprig of chive. And he pops that sucker in his mouth. Spits the mess out in a napkin. This shit tastes nasty. Let me just say he was not using his inside voice at the time. And was it me, or did the Secret Service lunge ever so slightly at precisely that moment? Anyway, I told you all that to tell you this. The next day we're flying home, and we're in mid-country somewhere, and Gabriel says, I gotta go to the baño. I said, mijo, it's at the back of the plane. 45 minutes later, he comes back. Oye, cabrón, ¿qué pasó? I thought you fell in, okay? Oh, I was just talking to that lady back there. And I turn around and I see the flight attendant standing by herself at the back of the plane. I made her cry. I hope that's okay. I go, Gabriel, it might depend on what you actually said to her, you know. Well, she saw my tattoos and she saw my Homeboy Industries shirt, and I don't know. She asked me a gang of questions. So I gave her a tour of the office. At 34,000 feet, Gabriel walks this woman through the office, introduces her to the job developers, hands her goggles so she can watch tattoos being removed, gives her a hairnet so she can observe enemy gang members baking bread. And then I told her last night we made history. For the first time in the history of this country, 3 gang members walked into the White House. We had dinner there. I told her the food tasted nasty. And she cried. I said, well, Gabriel, what you expect? She just caught a glimpse of you. She saw that you are somebody. She recognized you as the shape of God's heart. People cry sometimes when they see that. And suddenly 2 souls feeling their worth, flight attendant, gang member, return to themselves, that you may be one. It's mutual. For the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, we wait for it. If you can stay, we'll see you at 25 minutes to 10. Thanks.
Homeboy Industries.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You can donate however. We might even have the dollar dance. You ever see that at in your pinning dollars? We're going to do question and answer. I signed some books. I'm really happy that, thank you for, how many have read this book called Tattoos on the Heart? Thank you very much. If more people buy it and it suddenly becomes Tuesdays with Homie, or the purpose-driven homie or something like that, then I can keep my doors open, which is always the struggle. So those of you who have the book, if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, can I borrow that Tattoos on the Heart? Look them in the eye and say, buy your own damn book. The book came out a year ago, and February it came out in paperback, and March 1, the audio version came out. They wanted George Clooney, but they got me. So, but when the book came out a year ago, I got my copy a month before the pub date. So I'm opening the mail, and I have homies in my office, and I open the, hey, here's my book. And so the homies were all quite interested, and I'm passing it around. They're trying to find their names in it, you know. And so on the hardback edition anyway, my editor got a lot of nice people to say nice things. So on the cover has Anne Lamott. She says nice things. I presume these people actually read the book. I hope they did anyway. But anyway, they were saying nice things. And on the back, Carrie Kennedy and Marion Wright Edelman and a variety of people saying nice things. And then at the top of the back of the cover is Jack Kornfield, who's a philosopher and Buddhist and psychologist and great man. And so he has a 3-sentence blurb. And his first sentence is kind of, effusive, filled with adjectives that I'll spare you. But the second sentence begins this way. Father Boyle, the Gandhi of the gangs. So when this book gets in the hands of one of the homies named Pascual, we call him Pasky, and Pasky looks at this, and Pasky, gang member, grew up in the projects, graduated from Northridge, runs our parenting division. And apparently, I didn't know this, but part of his job description is to take me down a notch. So when he sees this, he looks at me and he goes, the Gandhi of the gangs. Like, this is really too much, And so the next day he emails me and he says, here's a blurb for your book. This book is astounding. Father Boyle is the Sarah Palin of the gangs. In fact, he can see Mexico from his back porch. So I immediately forwarded this to my editor and I said, please, I beg you, put this on the paperback edition. And she just wrote back one thing, NHA, and what was it? No, hell no. And, oh, hell no. OHN, I'm sorry. Oh, hell no. I got my acronyms wrong. Anyway, I encourage you to buy this book. Thank you. It'll help us, along with our chips and salsa, which are in all 256 Ralphs. So they're good. Yeah, leave no salsa behind. We were just voted 8 weeks in a row best snack sold at Ralph's. We beat Cheetos, I never thought I'd hear myself say that sentence, but anyway. So I'm going to open it up for the next 45 minutes, and so you go like this, I'll go like that. Yes, ma'am.
What's being done with little kids, like first graders or fourth?
I'm not so sure. Again, not every kid joined a gang in my community, so you always ask kids, why didn't you join a gang? Single mothers, it seems the profile seems to be identical. And they always have the same answer. They always say, because my mom chased my ass. It's always mom, it's always chase, it's always ass. And it's the pursuit, which I always think an odd parallel was, did you ever see that movie with Leonardo DiCaprio called Catch Me If You Can? And at one point he has an encounter with his father, way late, and again he pretends he's different people, and it's a complicated story, and the FBI's chasing him. And then he sees his father and he says, why didn't you stop me? Basically, why didn't you chase my ass? There's something about kids being in pursuit. Kids gravitating perilously close to something and then looking over their shoulder, will somebody chase my ass? Right. That's sort of key. You can decline it as a sentence to kind of figure out what are the elements of that, of the hot pursuit of a parental figure. But loving, caring adults who pay attention, this is all that matters for any age, and it's never too late. But if you got to get the diagnosis right. If you think that somehow they're being lured or attracted or drawn, then I don't know, you're going to deal with the lure, the attraction, and the draw. You're going to be concerned about music and clothes and yawn. None of that is important because they're being pushed. So I began this talk by talking about a kid who was not much of a player in the story, Poncho, who went with me to Palm Desert for that talk to the high school students. And as we're driving, and I'm saying to them, I said, look, I've never heard you guys tell your story. You're older guys. I trust you. But don't romanticize this thing, in the sense of romancing the drink. Because we all know that kids are never seeking anything when they join a gang. they're always fleeing something. So I just plant that idea. And so Poncho, big, huge guy, tattooed, probably 33. So he's no kid. And I do my half-hour spiel, and then Poncho gets up, and he starts to tell his story. I know parts of his story. And then all of a sudden, right in the middle of his story, he stops, he freezes. I'm thinking, should I throw him a lifeline? Something's happening here. And it was like a slide appeared in front of him. And he said, I think I was like 7. Yeah, I must have been 7. I was playing with matches, you know, like kids would be doing. And this pissed my mom off. So she grabbed me by the hand and she walks me into the kitchen. And we had one of those stove tops with the coils, and they turned it on. She turned it on and she waited for it to be red hot. And then she pushed my hand and held it down there for a long ass time. Well, the whole high school audience goes, "Ah!" Everybody gasps. And he pauses again and he says, all I remember is I woke up that night, I was asleep on the floor in the bathroom with my hand in the toilet water trying to get some relief because I was all tore up and pussy and burned. And again, they gasped. And then he looks out at these high school kids and he says, that's why I joined a gang. Well, he had never come to this realization until that moment. It had never occurred to him that he retrieved the thing he was fleeing. And he was, for the first time in his life, he was able to say it. Who knows what he used to say? You know, fast cars and women and money. Join a gang and see the world. But now he knows different. This is not to blame parents. It's just that there are always 3 things. If the profile is mentally ill, deeply despondent, thoroughly traumatized, then you need to get in there fast. Heal, rescue, deliver mental health services in a timely fashion, infuse hope to a kid for whom hope is foreign. Yes, ma'am.
A year or 2 ago, there was a big budget crisis with Homeboy, and there was a big call for donations and all that stuff in the paper. Can you talk about what happened after that and where you were?
Well, we're stabilizing. Thanks, and you know, it's dicey. I hate this part, you know. This is the only thing that keeps me awake, meeting payroll. We had to lay off 313 workers. We've hired back, you know, 100. So we have about 250 people working there now, instead of 427. You know, the county gave us $1.3 million, you know, and people were going, oh, the county saved you. Well, $1.3 million is 2 months and 2 weeks. I'm grateful for the $1.3 million. But we saved the county $20 million a year in otherwise money that would be spent on incarcerating. We saved the state another $20 million, money that otherwise would be used to incarcerate. So we're kind of a bargain. So I'm grateful for the $1.3 million. However, I think it should be higher than that. Plus, you know, they transport kids in vans from probation camps, shackled at the feet and handcuffed. We stop what we're doing. They come through a side door. We have our security guards posted up at either side. We usher them into the clinic for our tattoo removal. Nobody else is allowed in there. We give treatments to up to 20 kids. And then they get back in the van and they go back. And we get exactly, let me get my calculator out, 0 from the County of Los Angeles for the service rendered. So trust me, if they went to a dentist, that dentist would be paid. Now we don't demand it, but because we want to help these kids. But shame on them. We are the county's aftercare program. We are the county's reentry program. We are the county's rehab program. So I would think they should give us more money. Yes, ma'am.
What is the cost for people coming in to get, or do you allow outsiders to come in and get tattoos removed, and what is the cost?
Well, I mean, removal is a very costly thing, you know, so if you went to a private dermatologist, it'd be thousands and thousands of dollars. So it's free and we don't ask anything of anybody. We give priority to gang related tattoos. In the early days, we used to say elbow down, neck and face, because it's an arduous process, it's painful. Homies would come in and lift their shirt up and the name of their gang across their chest. I go, gosh, you know, keep your shirt on. No one will see this. But then they'll say things like often, they'll say, my kid will see it. Yeah. All right, very significant. I kind of bristle when I hear their tattoo removal programs where they demand stuff because everybody feels like the poor shouldn't get anything for free. So they'll charge something, or they'll say, do 100 hours of community service. We don't ask anything because we know it's so significant that they're asking to get their tattoos removed. We don't want anything to get in the way except the natural waiting time. And I like it that way. We're the only ones that do that anywhere. Wherever they have tattoo removal for free, they either ask for something or they demand community service hours. So. Yes, ma'am. What do you mean by naysayers?
Well, the people who question the way you, I mean, you talked about kinship and the people that, you know, are saying these are gang members.
Mm-hmm.
So you should have, you know, rules or structure.
Well, we have rules and we have structure, and I believe in that, and people demand that. I mean, kids want that. But let me say something about naysayers. And a lot of times people think nothing changes. You know, ooh, it'll never change. Somebody in the high up level in the mayor's office said, nothing we've ever done has worked. I said, where the hell have you been? 1992, 1,000 gang-related homicides in LA County. What's happened since 1992? That number's been cut in half and cut in half again. Why? Well, because since 92, places like Homeboy Industries, a place called Home, Toberman, Communities in Schools, LA's Best, the after-school program, all these things have happened since that time. Do I think these things have had an impact on that number? Oh, you betcha. In other words, everything we've done has worked. You just need to do more of it and support it and pay for it. But the people rolled up their sleeves after the unrest in LA, I think, and said, forget it. We're not going to wait for people. We're going to mentor. We're going to do this, 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 and this. And so you try to get, so stuff has worked. Not everything that works helps, but everything that helps works. So you want to do all the things that help. But going back to naysayers, the first 10 years of Homeboy Industries was marked by death threats, bomb threats, hate mail. Hard to imagine this now. Where was this hostility coming from? Well, not gang members, obviously, because gang members, Homeboy was a source of hope for them. They loved Homeboy. But where was this hostility and vitriol coming from? It was coming from people who demonized. So if you demonize the gang population, it's a short hop to demonize me for helping them. The friend of our enemy is our enemy, the Middle Eastern dictum goes. So that was really quite pervasive in the early days, you know. And I would write an op-ed piece for the LA Times, and then you brace yourself. The next day, there would be bomb threats, death threats, hate mail, you know, because you suggested in the LA Times that maybe these were human beings, and what if we were to invest in them rather than seek to incarcerate our way out of this problem? So somebody even suggested on my staff, you know, what if we changed the after-hour message, you know, to say, thank you for calling Homeboy Industries. Your bomb threat is important to us. For Father Boyle, push one, you know, so. My all-time favorite was a homegirl named Lisa, who was just a tough cookie, and she was trying to be very professional. I'm in my office, she's 10 feet away. Homeboy Industries, how may I help you? You bring that bomb over here, motherfucker. Bring it over right now. Oh, yeah. That's right, 1848 East 1st Street. Lisa? Yeah. What is that? And she just covers nonchalant. Oh, it's some fool who wants to blow the place up. And I go, how about God bless you and have a nice day, you know? She's giving the guy MapQuest, you know, I'm going. But that just underscores how different it is, and so when we got in trouble in May, my God, the LA Times says, this does not belong to Father Greg. This is ours, Homeboy Industries. I mean, it was incredible and hugely different from what we had known in the first decade of our existence.
My question is, you have the salsa and the chips now that have come like mainstream and Ralph's and everything. There's been some talk about doing a movie about Homeboy Industries, a major motion picture. Where is that at right now? Who would be playing you?
It may have began with Tom Hanks, but now it's Sean Connery. Unless, of course, Orson Welles hasn't died and he's still available. I don't know. I don't have any idea. Somebody owns the rights, and anytime anybody inquires, I just send them to this guy. Apparently there's a script, and apparently they're peddling it, and I don't know. I'll believe it when I see it. It's been around for 20 years, the idea of it. Yes, ma'am.
2 years ago, I picked up the phone and I called Homeboy Industries and I said, hey, I have a group of at-risk youth. There's a lot of talk about joining gangs. All of them are here because of domestic violence support. Would you guys come down and talk to them? 3 of your homies made the trek down to Long Beach. And I want to tell you that it was the most amazing experience we ever had. And I'm eternally grateful. We haven't been able to do it again because I know the state of the economy doesn't allow those trips as much.
Oh, to go ahead and ask for Ting Ting. Agustin, Ting Ting. Everybody calls him Ting Ting. If you ask for Ting Ting, he'll set up a whole thing.
It was great.
Yeah.
They came and they spoke to the kids, and I think they connected with them more than I had ever done in the 7 years that I had been there. And it was because a lot of them were talking about entering these gangs. A lot of them wanted to, feel that they belong somewhere. And after, they kind of made the connection that they did belong. They belonged with the support group. And maybe this different path would take them in a different direction. So it was an amazing experience. And you're a great speaker, but I also want to praise your homies for being just
Oh, that's great. Yeah, they're good speakers too.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I was fearful that your comment was going to go where it sometimes goes, which is, we called your place and nobody got back to us. And I go, oh, God. She's going to put me on Front Street right here in front of everybody. Let me just say that here's the thing. Community trumps gang. So you have to trump gang. You can't just reason your way out of it. Don't you see that it'll end in this coffin or this jail cell? You have to trump it. And community does that, and your group does that. People have to have, gang members have to have the experience of being held where they are freed from the dread that they'll be dropped. Held by the thing that will not die. Held by the thing that will not judge. And they need to have that experience of being held. So I had a kid waiting to see me who was in line, at first I thought he worked for me, as in past tense, because I hadn't seen him for a while. And I said, Juan, where have you been? Did you quit? He goes, no, they moved me to the bakery, which I didn't even know. That's how on top of it I am, So I see him, oh, you're working at the bakery, oh, great. And he had worked in the headquarters before. I said, so what's up? And because I've been doing this for way too long. So I'm a little cynical. I'm thinking, okay, which bill can't you pay? Phone bill, lighting bill, whatever it is. I said, so what's up? Nothing, it's my day off. And I just came in. I said, you did? Why? I like it here. I don't know. It's like home. He goes, I like my transformation, he says. I said, wow. And that was it. And again, cynical me waiting for, and I'm $50 short of my rent. No, he didn't do that. It was, I'm here just because I like it here. And I just wanted to tell you that. So community trumps gang. So you want to set up real life community so that they have a palpable experience of it. In the old Creaky days, our first motto was, our only motto really, was nothing stops a bullet like a job. So, I used to think, well, that does about 85% of what needs to be done. It gives a kid a reason to get up in the morning, a reason not to gangbang the night before, case closed. So we'd find jobs and we'd dispatch them. We'd go, okay, good, you're handled, next. Okay, good, you're handled, next. And then all of a sudden, that guy who got this good job breaks up with his lady, and suddenly he's back kicking it in the neighborhood. And suddenly he's in the wrong place at the wrong time. And suddenly he's doing 125 to life at Folsom. So I thought something was wrong here. And so what we discovered in the last probably 5 years is that community does trump gang, but you have to engage in attachment repair. So psychologically, every gang member who walks through our door comes with a disorganized attachment. Mom was frightening or frightened, and you cannot calm yourself down if you've never been soothed. So we restore, we repair, we heal, so that this gang member can come to terms with what this was about, acknowledge all the stuff he did, acknowledge all the pain he's endured, see and look at all the stuff he's had to carry, so that he can redefine himself. And once he redefines himself in a context of love and acceptance and community, then he can go out into the world. And his lady can leave him and it won't topple him. Or whatever the world will throw at him, it won't topple him. So there I am in a Target, and I see this guy Joey who worked for me for a time. And then he moved on, we got him a better job. And he's got his shopping cart with his 2 kids, 2 sons, hanging on the shopping cart like a little go-kart. And I give him a big abrazo. I hadn't seen him in a couple years. I always test homies. Would you ever see the homies? You ever go to the barrio? That kind of thing, Oh, no, I don't go to the neighborhood anymore. I don't have time for that, And then he says, I did get a phone call last week, which was odd, from a youngster, meaning some kind of young, unnamed, unknown gang member from his gang. I said, really? So what do you have to say? He invited me to a meeting. Now, gangs will have meetings, large, you got to go. In a park or some large venue. You have to go. I said, really? He invited you to a meeting? I said, yeah. So what'd you say? I said, I'm not going to your damn meeting. I'm a man. I'm a father. I'm a husband. I'm not going to your meeting. And I said, what did he say to you? He said, he called me a punk, which is quite strong for a youngster to tell an older guy, you're a punk. I said, wow, what did you say? If I was a punk, I'd be going to your meeting. Now that's the sound of a guy who's redefined himself, where he won't let him get himself punked by even his own homeboys. He knows what it is to be a man. He used to have thought that having courage means packing a gun. He doesn't think that anymore. He doesn't think a whole lot of things anymore. He's redefined himself in the world, and he's resilient to whatever gets thrown at him. See how one question will lead to a long-ass answer? Yes.
Hi, Father Boyle. I'm Mary Lowen. I work upstairs at Jewish Family and Children's Service. We're a private, nonprofit, non-sectarian agency of social services. I work exclusively with older adults and the disabled. I've seen more and more grandparents and great-grandparents raising their grandkids, their great-grandkids who may or may not be in gangs, or letting a grandchild come live with them when they get out of prison because they have no place else to go. Do you ever outreach to that population? Seniors.
But to the seniors? Again, people will say, do you prevent kids from getting, do you do the prevention part? And do you do this part and do you do that part? And we do our part, And so, but I think it's important to underscore, because how do you assess the health of any community in terms of this issue? More hands on deck, the better. If you have more stakeholders involved, then you're going to be a healthy community. So back in the bad old days when I arrived 25 years ago, there was, say, this metaphorical vehicle marked gang issue. And it was a tiny little car. And who was in the car? One person, law enforcement. And they were driving the vehicle. Period, the end, nobody else. Now cut to 25 years later, Who's in the vehicle? What kind of vehicle is it? Huge maxi van, you know? And who's in the van? Tons of stakeholders. This is healthy. Teachers, clergy, social workers, psychologists, regular old folks, mentors, folks who, accompany kids in after-school programs. The van is packed. That's healthy. What's unhealthy? Law enforcement still driving the vehicle. That's unhealthy. Because this has never been a crime issue. It's always been a community health issue. And again, if you get this diagnosis right, if you think it's a crime issue, well, then you're going to walk down the path that will always be unhealthy and not very effective. If you know it's a community health issue, then you put somebody else in the driver's seat. I was hopeful with LA because it looked, they named a gang czar, and I went, this is good, actually. Although it was too difficult. Our police chief at the time was too powerful, and he wasn't going to say, oh yeah, you handle the gang problem for the city. It wasn't going to happen. But it was a good model, because the gang czar could have been the galvanizer in chief. He would have been the one who would have gone to your senior center, or to the Kiwanis club, or to your church, and kind of say, okay, you could mentor, you could tutor, you could hire, let's go. Stop disqualifying yourself. That would have been the main job of the gang czar, to get everybody on deck. But what happened? Instead, it turned very inward, it turned very rarefied, it turned very professional. It returned to the stance that was not good in the first place, which was law enforcement saying, step aside, let us handle this. It's a dangerous job, somebody's got to go in. We'll tell you what happens, Do not trust or believe or accept anybody who says, step aside, let me handle this. Whether it's a priest, whether it's a cop, whether it's a hardcore gang intervention worker. All hands on deck. And we need to stop disqualifying ourselves, thinking like there isn't anybody in this room who couldn't be a beneficial presence in terms of this issue, in terms of these kids. You don't say, well, gosh, I don't have any tattoos, let's count me out. I've never been to prison, gee, I guess I can't be much help. Check right now, do you have a pulse? Here's your certificate, you are qualified to be helpful.
Support your staff in doing the work that they do and helping them not get burnt out with the process of working with people who are hopeless. And also, if you could talk a little bit about, we live in this culture now of outcomes and evidence-based practice and having to learn how our process is helping people when that process can be really, really long.
Yeah, I'm heartened by the fact that all of you moaned when she said evidence-based. Yes, united, let's stand against. I was just in D.C. at kind of a gang thing and Department of Justice, and evidence-based and outcomes and yawn. Because the problem is, in my book I have a chapter on success, where if you're driven by success, then watch what will happen. You'll morph yourself into starting to work with the most likely to succeed. That's the worst thing that could happen to you. And that's why none of us, as Mother Teresa says, we're not called to be successful, we're called to be faithful. So you're faithful to the people you're called to work with. And if it's not that I won't accept success, but I will only accept it if it's a byproduct of my fidelity. So I'm going to work with the people I want to work, because I don't want to morph into suddenly stacking the decks and only working with gang members most likely to succeed. So our place, especially the ones who get hired, it's an absolutely reverse situation. We have selection committee, and this happens all the time. Why didn't I get picked? I said, congratulations, we think you're great. That's why we didn't pick you. We think you'll actually succeed without us. We think you can probably get a job on your own. So if we pick you, it means we think you're not ready for prime time, basically, But the other question was about, so I always tell my staff, brace yourself for 2 steps forward, 5 steps backwards. If you're bothered by that, you won't last very long. So you have to decide. And we've had a lot of key deaths this year. Two kids in particular who were killed, who had turned their lives around, and just tragic, terrible. And again, what's true of death is true of setback. Brace yourself. In terms of death, you need to compile a list of things that are more powerful than death. Compile it today. You have to. Compile the list of fates that are worse than death. Compile it today. Because the day after tomorrow, when you get hit with some awful blow, like the death of a kid you love, then you won't be toppled because you've compiled your list. I think that's just important. I was reading the Dalai Lama, an interview, a feature profile in the New Yorker, and the reporter asked him about his own death, and he shrugged and he smiled and he said, "Change of clothing." I want what he's having. I think that's just so great. Change of clothing. But it's not just about death, it's about setback. If you got to brace yourself so that you can say change of clothing on the one hand. And on the other hand, you have to live today. So the ancient monks, when they got distressed and desperate and despondent and terrified and anxious, the ancient monks used to say one word over and over again, and the word wasn't God, and the word wasn't love, and the word wasn't Jesus. The word was today. Today. And they'd say the word over and over again, and it kept them here with the person in front of them. Which is also another way of saying delight in what is around you and the people you're working with. Because if you're attentive, it will be delightful. A lot of pain, a lot of heartache, a lot of tears. But if you're attentive, it will be delightful. So there's a kid named Saul who's just a handful. He's exactly the kid we want at Homeboy. 19 years old, thoroughly abandoned and rejected by his parents. The most disorganized attachment kid I think we've ever had. He's tattooed on his neck 5150. So there's his self-image, And he's a knucklehead, and everybody knows it, and they keep their distance. When he has a bad day, he will kick the dog. He'll have a meltdown. He'll hyperventilate. It's okay, Saul, you're okay. And this is a kid who gets held every day by the thing that will not die. That helps combat his dread of being dropped. So his therapist, who's a genius, says, okay, I want you to learn a brand new word every day. So he started to do this, and it's sort of therapeutic. So, you're talking about salsas. When it was launched, the day before it was launched, they had a big tasting and a testing or something up on the second floor. I didn't even know it. It was the end of the day, and Saul came to see me. And we were talking, and I was asking how things were. He said, I was tasting those salsas upstairs. I think the best one is the morita, the orange one. Yeah, I think that's our best one. And everyone concurred. That means agreed, he tells me. I said, why, thank you, and so I have to leave. I have to go to Downey to speak at this church, and I have to battle traffic. I said, Miko, I got to go. So I stand, and he goes, can I tell you something? I said, sure. I worry about you. You do? He goes, yeah. I think you should relax more often. In fact, it would behoove you. If you rested more often, That means in your own best interest. He said, well, thank you very much. So, 2 days ago, I walk into the office, and I have to pick something up, but I'm driving to Santa Barbara to give a talk. And he's there. Now, so keep this in mind. The office opens at 9. You have to be there at 10 minutes to 9 for our morning meeting. But he's there at 7. Here's a kid who's there at 7. 2 hours early, basically. How many buses he took? What time did he have to get up to be there? He's there at 7. There's one guy mopping, and he's just there, and he gives me a big hug. He says, you know what, G? I think I'm becoming a rehabilitated gang member. I go, really? Why? Well, yesterday I was on the bus, and there was this rich guy sitting next to me. I don't know how many rich guys take the bus, but be that as it may. And I notice he has this cell phone that is just wireless and I don't know what, and earplugs, and so I'll never be able to afford something like that. And you know what I used to be like? I had sticky fingers. I know exactly what I would do. My old self, I'd just grab that phone, and when the doors open, I'd run out. That's how I used to live. And I'm admiring this phone, and the rich guy says, "Here, take a look at it." And I thought, oh my God, he's just handed me the phone. And and I admire it, and I think, wow, I know what I used to do, and I'm not going to do it. So I hand it back to him, and I give him some advice. I say, "Thank you for letting me hold that. Don't ever trust people," he says, because you're going to hand them your stuff, and they're going to run off the bus, because I used to be like that. But now, I'm a rehabilitated gang member because I work at Homeboy Industries. And the guy asks him about it, and he gets off the bus, and he was so proud of himself. And so he gives me a big hug, and I drive to Santa Barbara. So hours later, I get a phone call, and it says Saul, and I pick it up. "What's up, son?" He's sobbing, and it's all echoey. I go, "Where are you?" "I'm sitting on the toilet in the men's room, And he's having a meltdown. I said, "¿Qué pasó, mijo?" Well, this lady who was 3 months pregnant lost her baby. And so he's sobbing, and why does God do this to me all the time, And so we had to kind of do that and do some theology on the spot, And I said, "Well, go see Teresa, his therapist." And he says, "When you come back, can you give me a blessing?" I said, "Sure." So I immediately text Teresa, "Be on alert, Saul, his lady lost the baby." I text Hector, who runs the place for me, and I said, "Be on alert, because he's a volatile kid. If something bad happens to him, he's going to kick the dog. So keep your distance, don't put any pressure on him." So that he would know, and he goes, "Got it." And everybody's on the same page, So I come back, and he's standing waiting for me in front of my office. So he comes in, he pushes his chair very close up, and he bows his head. And I put my hand on his shoulder, and I give him a blessing. And I tell him about it, how God's too busy loving him to be disappointed or to bring bad things into his life. That God's heart is as broken as yours is. And you're just great. And so I blessed him. And then he's sobbing, and he says, "I learned a new word today." I said, "Really, what's that?" He said, "I told Teresa my story of the rich guy on the bus. And she said, 'You're a man of integrity.'" "Is that right, integrity?" I said, "That's right, integrity." So that night he texts me, and he says, "I didn't know what this day would bring me. A lot of pain. But a lot of wisdom too," he said. Now, that's the sound of restoration. That's the sound of repair. That's the sound of attachment, reattaching, And this is what you do every day. And if that's not so successful all the time, and if that takes a long ass time, I don't care. And if your funders care, oh well. They just don't get it, but maybe they'll get it. Yeah, somebody else had a thing here. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, it's my experience that sometimes concepts can be illuminated through different ways. And I have two suggestions. One is a PBS documentary called Country Boys. These are not LA boys, but they are boys in trouble. And one of them, I realize now, has a frightened mother, and one of them has a grandmother who will not drop him. And the difference is, you just want to jump on the TV when you see it, because you know what's going to happen. You just feel what's going to happen. The two outcomes are very different. And the other is a book written by Patti Smith called Just Kids. It's about her relationship with Robert Mapplethorpe.
Yeah.
And her painful, naive approach to him. He never hurt her, but it just reminds me of parents who have a child that doesn't fit in, and they have this naive approach that maybe it works for them for a little while, but doesn't really help. And
That's interesting.
I just recommend both of them.
Yeah,
They're
that's
very interesting.
yeah.
What are they?
One was a PBS show called Country Boys. These are kind of ways of getting a handle on stuff. And the other one is Patti Smith's book, Just Kids, which I've heard a lot about. Good, thank you for that comment. Yes, ma'am.
I am a counselor at Su Casa, and the domestic violence that I do just counseling. And I'm in the mentality that when I'm dealing with residents, they are the experts in the same mentality of kinship. Because I think it's important.
Yeah, the question is about, she's a counselor, and then how you receive from them, and basically they know that they're valuable because you value them. It's not about information spewing. And how do we get my staff to kind of be on the same page? Well, are they on the same page, about in terms of kinship and stuff? I'd say basically they are. It's interesting, because when they get hired, I don't really care very much about the technical part. If you need a development person, oh well, where's your heart and do you get this? You can learn that other part. CFO, I go, where's your heart and do you get this? I don't know, you can learn all the other stuff. But occasionally folks will slip through where we kind of go, well, this person professionally knows how to do this, that, or the other thing. And then sometimes it's a mistake because then you get people who don't get our population. And that's a problem. Because it's hard to get unless you get it. Either it's like people who have common sense. Either you have common sense or you do not have common sense. And I don't know anybody who has sort of frankly got common sense if they didn't have it. I mean, I'm probably wrong about this, but my experience says it's just I live with Jesuits, common sense, no damn sense, common sense, no damn sense. Good guy, holy guy, talented guy, but no damn common sense. And it's just you either got it or you don't. It's like languages. I'm good with languages or I'm bad with languages. So and it's hard if people don't get it. That's why I love it when you meet somebody who's just in love and just gets it and sees who the kids are. And that's who you want to hire, especially in your biz. You want to get people who obviously don't judge, who can receive, and for me, what's the opposite of judgment? The opposite of judgment is awe. You want people to work with you who can stand in awe at what your clients have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. And the world will say, don't they know the difference between right and wrong? And that's completely, I don't even know what that language is. But that's where anything that strikes a high moral distance is the opposite of kinship. I guess that's sort of been my point. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Eileen, and I teach at the School of Social Work, Cal State Long Beach. Go Beach. And my question is to take our colleagues' question about the people we work with standing in awe, to getting our political leaders to stand in awe, and to get the idea of it is mutual. So as we think about walking out of here, and we can tell the narratives, but what advice, what suggestion, how do we get the people who are making decisions for us to come closer to that place, Father? How do we get there? Because we need to go there.
Yeah, so the question is, how do you get basically leaders or people who have power, I guess, or legislators or political electeds, to kind of get this. And, I don't spend a lot of time there. Maybe I should, But I always feel like, how does slavery end? Slavery ends when enough people stand with slaves. And then people start to go, why are you standing there? Because this is where you're supposed to stand, with people on the margins, And suddenly things change. Slavery couldn't stand anymore because enough people stood with the slave. It's not just solidarity, it's kinship. And so stuff changes if you stand in the right place. That's how sinful social structures get toppled. Not by some senator somewhere or some councilman. Sorry, it doesn't work that way. They'll follow you if you lead. If you stand in the right place, they will scurry toward you. They'll ask first, why are you standing there? And then you have to still be standing there when the dust settles. And then they'll follow. But you have to give up all hope that they will lead. They won't. And you have to give up all hope that screaming at them and getting the powers to be to change structures will change them. It won't. But if enough people, I always think this in terms of crime, when was the last presidential national debate that you heard somebody talk about crime? Long time ago. It was probably Bush and Dukakis when you had the Willie Horton ad. That may have been the very last time you heard that discussion. Why? I think it's interesting. Because it's always been a traditional wedge issue. You're soft, I'm tough. That's an easy one. And it stopped. Why? Because the people said bullshit. They said, that's not the choice. The choice is tough or smart. And everybody went smart. And suddenly wedge issues were lost because people chose to stand somewhere. Now, has it issued in policy changes yet? They're catching up with you. But because you chose to stand with smart, they've abandoned tough. I think. That's my interpretation. Now we need to get it to a point where sentences aren't stupid and we continue to be the only country on the planet that sentences children to die in prison. Shame on us. But we're the only country on the human planet. And that will change. But it's beginning because we've chosen to stand in a certain place. Anyway, thank you all very much.